Awesome. Just before we get started, who's heard of Umbraco before? Super. Who's used Umbraco before? Fabulous. Right. Okay. So my name's Andy. I'm one of the members of Umbraco Leads. So just before we get started, quick plug. Umbraco Leads actually meets on the same day as yours, so the first Thursday of every month. But anyone's welcome. We try and do the same thing, kind of mix up talks. It's not always Umbraco related. It's really nice to have other things in. We had history of the browser last year, and that was really cool. And yeah, just kind of other bits and pieces. Sometimes it's social. Next week we've actually got our open AGM, which is kind of setting the agenda for the next year and kind of looking at what we've done over the last year. So if anyone would like to come along, you're more than welcome. What I'm going to do is basically, first of all, quick overview of what Umbraco is, a little bit of history of where we've sort of what's happened with the project over the last kind of 20 years, and then a bit of a demo of Umbraco 8. So Umbraco is just a content management system, and we're all kind of, everyone's heard of WordPress nowadays. Main competitors to Umbraco in the .NET space are Sitecore and Kentico, Episerver. But Umbraco's free and open source, so it tends to be a really good choice for either smaller projects or ones where the client specifically asked for keeping the costs down because it's open source and it's free, so great bonus to start with. Umbraco means Allen key in Danish, which is interesting. V4 is kind of where I started with Umbraco, so version 4 was kind of one of the sort of most widely used when it came to prevalence. There was quite a bit of history before V4. So this is Niels Hartvig, the guy who invented Umbraco. It's his brainchild, and it's actually about 20 years old now. So he kind of started playing with the idea in his head in the kind of late 99-ish, initial prototypes, and then version 1, and then he actually open sourced it in 2005 when they brought out version 2. Version 3 is when they actually started getting proper traction, getting some MVPs in the community, and then version 4 is when they kind of started actually expanding the core dev team and making it into an actual proper community project, and that's when Per Plug joined, and kind of him and Niels were a bit of a double act really, and they kind of put a lot of love into the community. So really, kind of a long, kind of best part of 10 years, but Niels basically worked in a small agency as people did in the late 90s, websites that had dynamic content, and it came out of the database and it was lovely, and it was kind of a case of, well, how do we manage the content in the database? And every agency back then went, we'll write a content management system, and every agency had their own. When we had one in the agency I worked in called Vidar, and it basically sat on top of the database, looked at some tables and went, oh great, we can update field X, and here you go, and it was managed content, and it did the job. But Niels looked at them and thought, this is pretty pants, and that's really how Umbraco came about. And really sort of in 2008, that's how I found Umbraco, which was that we were in our agency looking to replace Vidar, and went and looked around for a project, and effectively this big project we were working on, we approached Sitecore and said, this looks really cool, can we maybe look at this? And they turned around and went, well, if it's less than 200 grand, this is sort of a decade ago, said if it's less than 200 grand we don't really want to know, and we're not going to license it to you. So really the main competitors were .NET Nuke, and what was the other one? There was something else, .NET Nuke and something else. No, it wasn't Orchard back then, it was, what was it? I forget, but .NET Nuke had a load of blow, something else, and Umbraco, and basically Umbraco really won hands down. We assessed it against a couple of things. So it might have been, it's 10 years ago, and there's a lot of stuff that's happened since then. So version 4, I also knew it as Runway 47 because it came with a starter kit. It was called Runway, so we named our dev server Runway 47 because it was Umbraco 4.7, and it was really cool. It let you do stuff, and it had an amazing back office. So instead of Vidar and really ugly CSS, this was cutting edge. This was awesome. But it does look a little bit Windows app, and a little bit, kind of, to look at it now, it's not great, but back then it really was quite cool. And it let you manage all your content and make pages and everything. But it was the joy of XSLT, and I don't know if anyone's used XSLT, but it's not really. Well, it's amazing once you kind of get your head into the space and you know what's going on and you can read XML like you're looking at the matrix. It's fine, but if you're trying to debug with it or do anything else, it's an absolute bloody nightmare. But they did also have .NET user controls, which was great because you could do some stuff there, but it was kind of hard to customize, and it wasn't It wasn't great, but for 10 years ago, it was cool. So the kind of version 4 was there, and it got a lot of traction. I mean, they built the Carlsberg website in it. They did lots of stuff with it, and it grew. And I think for a time, I don't know whether it still is, but TechNet ran on Umbraco, or part of it did. So I'm told, but yeah. So anyway, they went along and they said, "Hey, let's do version 5. Version 4 is really cool. Let's do version 5." Oh, we don't talk about version 5, and it's a bit of a standing joke. But basically, version 5 came along, and in 2012, they canned it really publicly. They spent about 2 years working on it. They hired a chief architect. They did loads of stuff. It was really cool, and it did work great in theory. It did all the stuff, looked shiny. But if they'd have released it, it probably would have tanked the entire Umbraco project. And basically, it came down to the way that they'd rebuilt this cool thing called Hive providers and the data access layer. Effectively, they swapped out in Hibernate instead of using Pockos and things. They went, "Oh, let's put this Hive thing in. It's really cool." And on your dev machine, it worked lovely. But as soon as you threw any form of traffic at it, bang! It just didn't cope. So at Code Garden that year, they said, "No, do you know what? It's not a great idea." I think 1 or 2 sites had maybe made it into production really early. People who'd been taking the nightly builds, been running with it. They said they'd support it and things like that. But I mean, ultimately it would have tanked the whole movement. And it was a really brave decision, and a lot of people were kind of a little bit funny about it, but actually it totally was the right thing to do. So they said, "Hey, let's move on, and we'll do sort of more versions." So they went along and they did version 6 and version 7. So 6 came out in 2013, and they basically said, "Okay, let's embrace MVC." Great move. And had the support for MVC4. They built in some good APIs and said, "Yep, right, we'll run with it in this way." Still had the same back office. So at the same time as they were doing this, they said, "Right, what we'll do is we'll rebuild the back office, and we'll use Angular, and we'll do loads of cool stuff where you can make your own property editors." So the property editors are things that you wrap around effectively your values that are either going to be strings, integers, or dates. So when you look at the back office, the database tables have really only got 3 value types, and then everything else is something that you wrap your own property, what's now called a property value converter, around. So they did that, and so that launched in January that year. And then in November of that year, they launched Project Bell, which was the redesigned back office. And that pretty much formed most of what you saw then for the next 5 years. So we started at version 7, and they were pretty good at giving you major minor releases. So 7 was pretty alright when it came out. Really good, nice, friendly back office. This is what the back office looks like in the later versions of 7. It started off a little bit more basic than this. It didn't used to have the rebranded colours and things, but they kind of went through a lot of iterations of 7. So people will know certain versions of it. So 7.2 is when they brought in something called grid editing, so allowing you to kind of have a property editor in the back office that gives you components that you can pick into a lot larger templates and things. So not just single value properties like where you're seeing here. They start to give you things that you can build up complex page layouts from different property editors that are all glued together and then rendered out in your templates. So that was 7, and it's evolved quite a lot. They're now actually not actively developing 7 anymore, because last year they released version 8, which they talked about for a very long time. And it was kind of almost a running joke about when's it gonna release, because it was always, "Oh, we're working on it, we're thinking about the architecture, we're replacing loads of the stuff." And they kind of released it really quietly. They didn't wait till Code Garden, they didn't do any big fanfare, and it was pretty alright. But under the hood, what they've actually done is rewritten a shed load of everything. So because Umbraco did such a lot of evolution, and a lot of it was Niels' original code, there are several dodgy bits of Danglish in there in the variables. There's all kinds of weird comments. There's 5 or 6 ways to do things. So to get a property, you can use get property value, get loads of other accessor names for it. And what they've done with V8 is they've made it super standardized. So there is one way. There is the right way to do it. There's not 5 different ways that different people might argue about how it's done. The massive code cleanup, and then the big ticket items that they put in. So the 2 really large things that they brought in with V8 was multilingual in the core. So there's been several times over the past where people have written, and the biggest one's called Vorter, because Umbraco is really good for plugins. So people have written Vorter, which effectively wraps all your properties and allows you to have each property as a multilingual property. And it works great, but again, there's different ways that you can use that, and you might want to use different tree structures, all kinds of stuff, but V8 gives you multilingual right down. So you say, get me a property value, you also can pass in a culture at the same time. So it makes it really baked in, and you can't, unless you want to do something crazy, there is the right way to do it. And the other thing they brought in was something called infinite editing, which I'll show you when we have a look at the CMS. So, quick demo of the actual install, because it's super easy to get going on installing Umbraco. So if I just show you this, because I didn't want to rely on the internet here. Let's just see whether it will run. So this is basically just fire up a blank .NET web application, tell it you want to install package Umbraco CMS, and assuming that my GIF decides to load or not, possibly not, embarrassing. You'll see it run through, you'll see it do the installer, and effectively it will give you a blank Umbraco install. It's not going to want to do that right now, so what we'll do is we'll just skip to the demo. So, I mean, the installer process basically will go through, it'll say, do you want a blank Umbraco install? You say, yeah, it gives you a username and password box, you give it that, and you're up and away. There's no licensing, no faffing around, it'll just load up, and you'll see a SQL CE database created to store your content in, and away you go, you can start developing. You get lots of options. You can configure it as a blank instance, you can connect it to a SQL database, you can connect it to another couple of database providers that they support, but it's pretty straightforward. So the demo website, straight out of the box, is this pretty one, which you'll see in a moment. Here's the Umbraco sample database, and it comes with a nice starter kit. So basically you've got a few pages in there. They didn't used to give you a starter kit, so most people looked at Umbraco and went, this is terrible, what do I do with it? So that's when the starter kit came along, because it actually shows you a few document types and a few data types. So if we just have a look at the back office, so your Umbraco back office is always going to sit on /Umbraco. So this is the shiny V8 back office. Looks pretty much like the V7 one, because it's got a purple nav bar and some other stuff, but really what they've put a bit more thought into the user interface. So they've moved all the stuff up to the top just to give you a little bit more real estate along here for doing things, and actually just makes it a little bit neater. So inside Umbraco you get a content tree at the left hand side, and basically that's always going to represent your site structure. That gives you all the pages on your site, and then on the right hand side you see your document type. So really, I mean, anyone who's used a content management system before, it's fairly straightforward. You get your tree, and then you get your content. V8 has got this thing called infinite editing, which if I were to look at, what can we look at in the start kit? They've got nothing to infinitely edit, which is great. So we'll jump straight into looking at your doc types. So Umbraco, this part of it really is just a properly high-level thing about how Umbraco manages content, so what a doc type is and what a template is. So your document types that I've just edited there, so if you sit, and actually this shows you infinite editing. So infinite editing, the idea is that anything, so when you're picking other bits of content, you're going to sometimes want to access them. So if you've got an image, you're going to open up the image. Instead of having to go find it in the media library or find another page that you've linked to, infinite editing lets you open things up, so it's going to slide in. So if you've got things there, they'll slide there, and you don't lose context of where you are in the CMS. So let's just really quickly add a new property. So we'll just add a test property, and we'll use an existing data type. So data types are a whole thing. Data types are the things where I said before about you can create different values on top of strings or whatever. So it might be that you want to have something that has 3 numbers or whatever else it's going to be. So for this one we will just use a text string, because that's pretty straightforward. And we'll save our document type. And then what we should get is, on our home document, we've got a test property here. just call that .NET York. So all you're doing is basically, you know, property value manipulation, the same as you did back in the late 90s. It's just a little bit prettier and a little bit easier to use. So we've got that on there. And if we have a look in our info tab, you'll see that all of the document types here have got different templates, and you can have multiple templates for a document type, or you can kind of swap out all the rendering engine if you really want. I've seen some really crazy things with it. But at the back of the template, all you've really got is some Razor. You can edit your Razor either in here, so a lot of people, or you'll find people will just, you know, if they're doing a super small site, they won't even bother doing it in Visual Studio. They'll just do it in here because it's, you know, it's pretty straightforward to manipulate. But I think, you know, it's important to actually look at some of the .NET stuff. And one of the really cool things that they brought in version 7 and they've kind of brought through into version 8 properly is strongly typed models. Because for years and years in Umbraco you had magic access of strings, so you'd say get me property value and you'd pass it a string name, and then some bugger would go and rename a property and suddenly everything falls apart and your yellow screening here, there and everywhere are getting nulls out. So you've got in the back office now, so in the settings tab, you've got something called the models builder, and the models builder is literally just going to it's going to look at your database structure, your document types, and it's going to generate your models. So if I just go and generate the models here, you've got different models modes as well. So you can either have them just generated as a DLL and dumped out somewhere. You can have them done it in memory. So if you're not really going to write any C# that wants to rely on it, you don't need to. Or you can have it write them out as classes, just so that you can actually, and I prefer that because then you can actually see the classes, and it's just easier to find them. Then you can, they're also all partials as well. So if you want to put decorations on top of there, so you want to have something that, I don't know, gets you the time difference between a date and there, you can put a property on there that actually is a partial on that, and then when you're looking at your model you can kind of do all kinds of funky things with it. Models Builder is actually something that they brought in, so Umbraco are really good at looking at things that the community do and pinching it into core. So if it's worth being in core, they'll look at it, they'll take it into core and they'll kind of polish it and put it in there. So that was one of the really big things that kind of worked in hand with when they went to MVC and having proper strongly typed models. I think it started to make a lot more sense to kind of proper MVC developers and proper .NET devs, because they've looked at it and gone, oh, actually, yeah, I can work with this, and you can do all the kind of fancy stuff that you can do with MVC. So we've got a set of generated models, and then if I just go back and have a look at my home one, so we've got our, there's my H2. This is the best part of the demo, so be prepared. So you can just do model dot, and then we do, oh, look at that test prop, and it's there as a proper, you know, kind of IntelliSense property on there. And then this is really getting very riveting. There we go. Your property written out as a nice strongly typed model, and it's actually quite straightforward. But I mean, there's a load of other cool stuff you can do in the back office, but really that just gives you a super high level of, you know, what the back office looks like, what your document types are, how you can amend them, and then how you can render them out. And really everything else is just pretty vanilla .NET stuff. I often get asked, oh, can Umbraco do X? Umbraco is literally just there to provide a content store and to provide a way of kind of managing nav. Everything else is just anything that any .NET developer could do. So, you know, my kind of general thing that I give to sort of any client that's talking about it is, you know, you don't need to say, can Umbraco do it? It's, can your developers do it? And generally Umbraco will do it. You can put custom routing in, you can do anything else, you can do membership providers, you can use all of the other fancy .NET stuff as you would in any application, and Umbraco is just going to sit there and manage content, and you just kind of bend it to your will, which I think is, it's really versatile. And yeah, so there's Umbraco 8. I think it's definitely going to go from strength to strength. It was a bit of a shaky start for 8, and they definitely needed to wait for the kind of 8.1, 8.2, but they've really kind of kicked a lot of the things that effectively they rushed it out, and now all the work that they've done in the last year has really paid off, and it's actually pretty production ready nowadays. It sits there, and unless you want to do anything crazy with it, you know, it will do pretty much any kind of brochureware content stuff, right up to the more advanced things. So yeah, that's high level overview of Umbraco. I don't think there are any more slides. In fact, there aren't. I think it just goes on to say, do we have any questions? And thank you very much.